share my screen, make sure I'm on where I want to be. Okay. Oh, that's not where I want to be. All right, now I'll share my screen. So I have a couple of short videos that I'll be playing today, a lot of information and a lot of heavy information to try to cram in. But as I mentioned, I looked at your discussion board posts, which I enjoyed. I had time to just respond to a few of them. So I'll, when I give your grades, I give a more detailed response to each of you. But Bree posted this. So this was the topic this week was two things: implicit bias and euphemisms. So I asked you to, look at the essays that you read and figure out what they were talking about, what some examples of implicit bias is. And I think all of you had a great overview of those, and I'll read some of your responses in a second. But this was an image that Bree posted, and I was just like, this is perfect. Such a perfect example. So take a minute if you want to read through that. So this is from Modern Family, which I'm not familiar with. Bree, did you want to share anything else?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Modern Family is was a comedy sitcom show. Um, just this giant family who like, all right, this is a older man who is remarried and he has two grown children of their own who also have family, and it's just basically like that modern American family, and they portray different family situations as far as like, okay, we have adoption, we have second marriages, but one of the long running jokes is that they can't understand Gloria and her thick accent 'cause she's, from Colombia. um and so finally, like, we go seasons and seasons without her ever really like yelling at them back about it, but finally, she explains it to them, and I immediately was reminded of that while we were going through these essays and listening to these videos.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, I like this dialogue. And like I said, now I'm gonna have to investigate that show because I've never watched it before. But as you said, the sad thing is that it's her accent and the way she speaks becomes a joke. And I said it reminded me of back in the day. So this was before my time, but I Love Lucy. Um, so Lucille Ball and her husband Ricky Ricardo, that was on the show. Um, so they were a couple, and he's a Cuban American. So he had a thick accent. It was the same thing almost every show. Whenever he spoke, there was the joke around nobody being able to understand him, um, and things like that. There are other. I remember as a kid watching that show. Again, it was before my time, but reruns. But then now as an adult, I think about some of that humor, so-called humor. I'm like, God, that's so now so politically incorrect and also so offensive. Um, but anyway, right, it still happens, as you said. But I like the way I like her comeback there. So I just want to share that. All right, so now moving on, and I looked at the Twitter post that you did, and I don't know if any of you noticed, but I think Jamila liked a couple of your comments that you had made about the TED Talk that she did. So that was really cool to see. And so then the discussion board that you did for Wednesday, this was, like I said, on the topic of implicit bias and language. And I just put a couple of things that stood out to me. But again, many of you had similar responses about implicit bias. But I liked what Tarek said here: expressing one's bias indirectly while being either completely unaware of it or at least reckless of what you say subconsciously, and that it's 24/7, so it never stops. So I think that was an important point. And I think the whole thing, so several of you said this, but this kind of summed it up too, is that implicit bias can happen unconsciously. We may not be aware of it, and it may come out accidentally. However, it can come out all the time, as that word reckless implies, that You may be speaking these unconscious biases and not realizing how offensive they are. And then Halil made a good point too. Even when people are not openly prejudiced, it might cause them to respond in a biased way, in biased ways. So yeah, it may not be that somebody's intentionally trying to hurt somebody or be judgmental or discriminate in any way, but we all have these prejudices. Again, it's, you know, well, we'll talk about this in the essays and in the slideshow, but the way we're raised, like our religions can be a factor, our education can be a factor, where we live, who our parents are, what our culture is, what our politics are, all of those, and what we watch on TV, what we see, what we read, all of that can affect how we see the world and how we see ourselves. And so we may not realize we're developing these biases. So that's kind of what I was thinking about there. And then for language, I liked this. There's two things from Aisha here that stood out to me. So I like this line: language is the heart of who we are. And I think that's really important to think about, that it both what we read, what we listen to, like what we listen to on TV, news, etc. All that can shape our identity. And then the language that we use expresses who we are. So you saw, like with Jamila Lyascott's TED Talk, she had, you know, trilingual. And I think it was Melissa who said she speaks 4 languages, including Christian English. And I thought that was an interesting interpretation too. But all of those things, again, the way we express ourselves and what we learn about the world, contribute to who we are. And it's language that does a lot of that. It kind of shapes our identity. And then for the essay, Language versus Lies, Emma said that ads are made to draw you in like a fish on a hook. I thought that was a really good simile. I love when all of you get creative and use the figurative language like that. And then Aisha said, in order to combat that deceptive language or euphemisms, you said we need to insist on the truth. And when we do that, we are defending the things we value from those who try to corrupt us. I thought that was a really powerful statement too. So thank you all for your discussion board contributions and your thoughts on those important issues, which we'll continue to talk about at the end of the class. So like I said, I've got a lot to squeeze in. And this poem I wanted to share by Mika Bourne. I don't think I added it, but I put it in the Blackboard folder, but in case you want to check out his website, I'm putting this in the chat box. But so Jamila Lyascott had her TED Talk about being trilingual, and she talked about being articulate. Mika Bourne has a different take. Well, I should say no, it's not different. He kind of addresses the same issue, and even like some of the issues of Amy Tan's essay, Mother Tongue, where he's reflecting on that language that he grew up with and language that was stolen from him. So he has kind of like both of those women, he's addressing some of the same issues in his, excuse me, in his poem. So this is a poem, he performs it. So if you ever heard of poetry slams, that's kind of like this. It's like kind of in between poetry slam and like a rap, where he's performing the poem. So it's called Native Tongue. Let me preface it too. Be prepared to get goosebumps. You might want to take notes too. I saw him speak. There was a webinar. One of the only good things about COVID is a lot of meetings or conferences, you know, would be normally in person, but because of COVID, they're still online. So I was able to attend this webinar, and I saw him present this. So I was like, oh my God, I hope there's a video of it somewhere because I need to share it in my class. So yes, there is this video on his website. So I'm going to stop talking and share it so you can watch.
According to ShakespeareOnline.com, the English language owes a great debt to Shakespeare. He invented over 1,700 of our common words by changing nouns into verbs, changing verbs into adjectives, connecting words never before used together, adding prefixes and suffixes, and devising words wholly original. If I could, I'd spit this in whatever mother tongue was ripped from our mother's lips. But the closest I got to that is hip-hop, is black talk, is improper, non-proper, unproper, uneducated, un-educated, unscratch, assimilated, we talk, our talk. Make y'all wish y'all know I'm talking about talk. Make y'all ask your black friend talk. Make y'all run to urbandictionary.com talk. That one thing, that something that belongs to us. That us you try to demonize, envy, copy, despise. That us you try to categorize, stereotype, try to shame our broken English you wish you could understand, but you can't never get it because we stay fly, we stay fresh, we stay changed, we stay everyday new way to say we never believed your lies, we never spoke your tongue, we been educated, uneducated, educated, unscratched, assimilated, and if you ever want to know what we talking about, maybe you need to unlearn a thing or two. Who says our vernacular ain't classical? Who says rap lyricists are anything less than Shakespearean? Shakespeare, a man who turned nouns into verbs and invented 1,700 words. That's funny. When we break the rules, we're called ignorant. When we invent words, they're called slang. The way we talk is improper, non-proper, unproper, uneducated, educated, unscratched, assimilated. We ain't never been dumb. We break English like chains. This is our native tongue.
All right, yeah, Aisha's clapping. I'm gonna stop sharing. Yeah, anyone have any reactions they want to share? Tiffany, you got goosebumps. Did anyone write anything down? It was just so fast. And so much.
A lot of the videos we've been watching recently, the way that they're making their speeches, they all seem to be making them in the same like type of tone.
Okay. Do you want to elaborate what you mean?
Kind of just like in a freestyling way that makes you feel what they're saying more.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. Freestyle, yet at the same time very conscious, but yes. And Aisha, I see you wrote down break English like chains. I wrote that one down too. And yes, so spoken word poetry. So this is that idea of when you perform your poem in a poetry slam, you definitely have that rhythm. You can feel the rhythm, you can feel the emphasis of certain words. So there is that conscious effort to deliver a poem that way. I know, Melissa, you said, I need to hear it again. It was so much to take in. I love it. Shakespeare created words by using them in the way they weren't meant for. I feel, you know what? So I've watched this maybe half a dozen times. Every time I watch it, I'm like, whoa, I need to watch it again. So that's why I gave you the link so that you can have it and really check out his other poetry too. But yeah, that's an interesting point about Shakespeare creating words, but yet when other people, like he said, like when he creates words on somebody, African American and the slang language, that's what it's called, slang. Or he said, when we broke the rules, we're called ignorant. Right, but yet Shakespeare did that. And Marina, you wrote down the full quote, we've never been dumb. We break our English like chains. Yes, I love that one too. And I'm not having you all do a tweet today, but I can't remember if he's on Twitter. But if you know, certainly those are some excellent lines that you could tweet if you want to, even though it's not required. And Maria said, yes, that it's us you try to demonize, right? Glad you all like that poem. It's heavy and tense, but really important. And like I said, I found out about him last semester and I started sharing it last semester. So now I will continue to. So thank you for your comments there. So let me come back to sharing my screen. And then we'll shift gears a little bit. So this was, so as I said, native tongue kind of was like that bridge between what Jamila Lyascott was talking about in her TED Talk and what Amy Tan wrote about in her essay Mother Tongue, similar ideas. So, so we're going to take it down a notch to Ocean Vuong, who's equally powerful, but you'll see definitely a contrast. So Ocean Vuong is the author of the essay that we'll talk about next for about 10 or 15 minutes. And his essay is called Immigrating into English. And just to give you some background on him, and if you're curious, I think I did link his Instagram feed. He's not on Twitter, but he's on Instagram. So he has in his bio, there's a little bit on the page in the Norton Sampler about his background, but here's more about him. So he was born in Saigon, Vietnam, and his family escaped and they sought refuge, I think they said in the Philippines, and then he moved to the United States and he settled in Hartford, Connecticut. So he was in a working class family. They lived in a tenement in Hartford. His mother worked at a nail salon and his father worked in factories. And this was the interesting coincidence. So he also went to community college. He went to Manchester Community College, which is slightly east of Hartford. And he dropped out. And then he transferred to Pace University, where he started studying international marketing. Didn't like that either. He dropped out. But then he ended up going back to school and studying literature. So at Brooklyn College, he got a bachelor's degree in 19th century American literature, and then he continued to study for his MFA, Master's of Fine Arts in Poetry from New York University. And he currently lives in Northampton, which is a very artsy town in Massachusetts. And he's an associate professor at UMass. So I want to play a video of him where he talks about language and the power of language. And he gives a little bit of background in this. It's a short video, but just so you can see him, hear him, and then we'll talk about his essay. Bree, you love that town, Northampton, I assume you were responding to. All right, so he has a lot to say in here, but like I said, very different delivery.
I use language and literature as a way to orchestrate a framework to think and inquire about American life, including the legacy of American violence. My name is Ocean Vuong, and I'm a poet and writer. I grew up surrounded by Vietnamese refugee women who use stories to create portals. The story is a virtual reality into another world, out of the present. But it's also a record of where we've been. And a story is an inheritance. Nice Guy with Exit Wounds was a series of poems that attempts to cast a separate mythology out of geopolitical violence. And I used elders and predecessors like Homer and a lot of the Greek classical texts and recast them in the guise and the gaze of Vietnamese American life in the aftermath of the Vietnam War. One of the central questions in Unearthly Briefly Gorgeous, having been written as a letter to a mother who'll never read it, is ultimately, does language matter? Is it worth it to speak your mind and your truth in fiction or otherwise. If an audience, even if it is an audience of one, is never promised, doesn't matter. Often we demand of the American novel to be cohesive, a monolithic statement of a generation. But having grown up post 9/11, cohesion was not part of my generation's imagination, nor our language, or our self-identity. And I felt that if I were to write my version of an American novel, it would have to look more like fragmentation. In my Zen Buddhist practice, one of the most privileged state of minds is not the expert, it's not the master, it's what's called the beginner's mind. The beginner's mind is a mind that approaches the natural world and the phenomena within it with utmost curiosity. And I think one of the most perennial powers of an artistic mind is awe and wonder before the world.
Right. I feel like I needed that kind of sense of calm for the moment. Does anyone have any reactions to what he shared about language? And Marina said his tone was so soft yet impactful. Yes. A story is an inheritance. Yes, I like that line too. And Tiffany, you enjoyed listening to him too. Yeah, it was very calming, and it kind of, it's almost like, very Zen-like. It forces you to forget about all this stuff going on out in the world and just listen to his soothing voice. It's like I said, I really feel like I needed that. So I also wrote down, in addition to that, the stories being our inheritance, I think that's a great line. I also wrote down, we use stories to create portals. So like this passageway to different worlds, and sometimes we're escaping the present into these other worlds that we're creating. And then I also liked his, so this is a very Buddhist principle of beginner's mind that he mentioned, that it's not about being an expert. No one is an expert, kind of seeing that as like, if we see ourselves as not an expert, but always a beginner, then we're open to the world around us. We're open, we're curious, we're willing to learn. And we recognize that, we can be lifelong learners if we have that kind of sense of being a beginner. And it's also very humbling in a way, so that you're not seeing yourself as better than somebody else because maybe you have a college degree and they don't. But it's seeing everyone as equals, that we're all in that same state of learning. So those are just some, ideas that not necessarily related to the essay, but I just thought, really important life lessons too in that short 2.5-minute clip. Melissa said you loved it as well. As a Christian ray of life, wisdom is knowing we know nothing, yes, and have much to learn. Thank you for sharing that. Right, it's like, I think probably at the base of many religions is that idea of humility, and that we all have so much to learn. But then it sadly gets distorted in other ways. All right, so I'm going to go to the essay in the Norton Sampler. So now that you have like a little bit of background on him and his perspective, so this is an essay called Immigrating into English, which is kind of like telling you what that story is going to be about, which is him learning to speak English and writing one of his first poems. And when I first read this story, I thought, oh, I wonder if that poem is, oh, sorry, I'm not sharing my screen. I like suddenly realized, hold on. I'm there and you're not with me. Okay, here we are. Sorry about that. So learning English and writing his first poem, when I first read this essay, I was thinking, oh, it would be really cool if he had published that poem somewhere, but I could not find it. So he starts by telling his story. What do you first learn? So the exposition, and I kind of shared some of it with his bio. Or maybe I should say, what does his family think about education and learning how to read? I think that's a better question. Who can I call on? How about, all right, I'm going to say Emma.
You said what was that?
Yeah, I was just going to ask the question, what was his family's reaction to him learning, going to school, learning how to read?
If I remember correctly, they didn't really see the importance in it.
Right. Excuse me. So they didn't see it as important. And I'll just open this to anyone else too. And if nobody answers, I'll call on somebody. So not only did they not see it as important, but what did they kind of see for somebody that does learn how to read and somebody who does educate themselves? Like the negative connotations associated with that. How about Amir? Are you there? What did you remember? All right, maybe I'll call on three people. Okay, thank you. Yes, Wendy, thank you for saving me there. Yes, they kind of saw that as like a snobbish, that somebody is snobby and stuck up if they're trying to learn how to read. Because he says he came from a family of illiterate rice farmers and his parents did not learn how to speak or write English. So he kind of was the first one in his family to learn how to read and write English. So that's kind of where he starts. He talks about his way of learning, which is very similar to Frederick Douglass, if you think about it. He says he was surrounded, inundated by Vietnamese language, but then when he entered kindergarten, he learned his ABCs and, he kind of memorized the letters. And he says within a few years, he became fluent, but only in speech, not in the written word. He was not good at writing. So he writes about this first experience that he had in fourth grade, where he was told that they had 2 weeks to write a poem in honor of National Poetry Month. And this is like the similarity with Frederick Douglass. I would instead spend the class mindlessly copying out passages from books I'd retrieved from a blue plastic bin at the back of the room. So kind of like the same way that Frederick Douglass used to just, write words in that copybook over and over until he knew what they meant. So he says, the trouble began when I decided to be dangerously ambitious. I decided to write a poem. So he uses dialogue sparingly in this essay, and I highlighted some of the lines. So when he wrote this poem and he submitted it to the teacher, how did the teacher react? Right, Marina, that it wasn't truthful and he thought it was plagiarized. And yes, he was very rude. And Tiffany says he copied it, the teacher said that he copied it or claimed he copied it. So, and you see that in this dialogue. Where's the poem you plagiarized? He held it up to the light as if he was, so he uses this metaphor, as if he was examining counterfeit money. And he says, how did you even write something like this? So he didn't believe that this young boy from Vietnam who could barely speak English or could, was fluent in speaking but not good in writing, that he could write this poem. And then he shares all these lovely sensory details of, again, more of this idea of describing what the teacher was like by tipping over the desk and everything went flying. So very rude. And then he says, but no poem. And then he gives you the background of this. Weeks early, I'd been in the library. It was where I would hide during recess. Otherwise, and I don't want to read the words, but otherwise, because of my slight frame and soft voice, the boys would call me names and pull my shorts around my ankles in the middle of the schoolyard. So this would be one of the examples some of you wrote about in the discussion board of, it goes a little beyond implicit bias, but still implicit bias and bullying as a result. And, he had that experience as a child. But instead, that's why he would spend time in the library, and that's where he would hide. I could relate to that. That he would just be in his books and learning that way. And then he discovered this box of cassettes, so cassette tapes. I think that you can still get tape recorders and players these days, but for a while they were not available. But anyway, back then that's what we used. And he listened to the great American speeches. And what was the experience? What was the speech that captured him, and how did it inspire him? So he doesn't name it. Yes, Dr. Martin Luther King, he doesn't name it, but this was the I Have a Dream speech, because he says he was this robust male voice, so lovely descriptions here, surged forth, emptying into my body. The man's inflections made me think of waves on a sea, which reminded me of Tyrick in the other class that I teach, that comment about, it's interesting because his name is Ocean, but he has this metaphor of waves on a sea. And then this other metaphor, right, Aisha, it inspired his poem, If a Boy Could Dream. Exactly. So that's why he's referring probably to the I Have a Dream speech. And so he uses this metaphor. His voice must possess the power of a moon, something beyond my grasp. I thought that was an interesting way to say it. But he says all he knew is that it was a doctor. And right, Marina, that line, there must have been medicine in his words. Can there be medicine in words? I liked that that metaphor there. He says maybe these people were ill and he was trying to cure them. There must have been medicine in his words, which is like, again, literal and figurative. That, well, no, he was not a physician. He was not that kind of a doctor, but yet he did have that healing power with his words, and it could have been figuratively perceived as medicine, that it was, helping to heal people who heard him. So it's interesting that as a child, he had that kind of metaphorical, figurative language way of looking at words. And that can happen too with different languages, because of the translations of words sometimes are not literal translations. They may be figurative translations. So yeah, he started to think of that, I have a dream. And he wrote his own poem, and he used those phrases, promised land, mountaintop. And he thought of all the women that were around him when he was a child, where he was with his grandmother and she was in her garden, and he has all these lovely words. These are different kinds of flowers that he probably included in his poem. And he has this one quote from it. If a boy could dream of golden fields full of lilacs, tulips, and marigolds. And he says he knew the words if and boy, but the others he had to look up. And I thought this was another interesting metaphor here. After a few days, the poem appeared as gray graphite words. the paper a white flag. So a white flag is usually like when you're declaring like amnesty or that you're surrendering. So he says, I had surrendered, had written. So it's almost like he, you know, once he surrendered to the page, then the poem came out. And then you have that dialogue from his teacher again, that doubt, where is it? It's right here. And then he pointed to it. And then another lush kind of figurative conclusion here. He said, I had read books that weren't books, and I had read them using everything but my eyes. What do you think he means by that? So I wonder if it's like he had read stories that weren't books. So it's like you create these images in your head, so that you're, you know, the words kind of translate in your mind, but you're not, and you're seeing it in your mind, but not through your eyes. Yeah, maybe reflecting on his life too. Good point, Aisha. And he says, from that invisible quote reading, I had pressed my world onto paper. So yes, he's taking those images in his mind and putting them into words. But then he has this line, as such, I was a fraud in a field of language. So he's using that metaphor, which is to say, I was a writer. I have plagiarized my life to give you the best of me. I was going to ask what you think of that. And I see Bree said, it reminds you of the writing advice we got a couple of weeks ago, write your own experience. I think that is also what made all of our narratives so powerful as we got so personal. Yes, thank you. Excellent point. You're all giving me, I mean, you're all giving us these really nuggets of wisdom here. So awesome. So yeah, definitely. That's what I think he's trying to say there, that it's when you're a writer, you're trying to capture it as best as you can. So it's almost like you're writing your past, or he's saying plagiarizing my life, to give you the best of me. But then you pick and choose what you include. So in a way that we're also a little bit of editors as we do it. So that was, thank you for your thoughts on that essay. I really enjoyed the essay and your comments. We can maybe refer back to it, but I'm going to now shift gears. So I'm going to start. So this video I just saw a couple days ago, short video again. And then we'll go to my slideshow that I have. I'm going to try to do that in like 20 minutes. And then maybe like the last 10 minutes of class, I want to go over your homework assignment, and I'll just show you an example. And I want to talk a little bit about the interview, family interview at the end of class. So that's what for the last half hour. Okay, so this video I've already queued up, but I will put it in the chat box. It was posted on Twitter, so I don't have a separate video link, but this is the link from Twitter. And I queued it up. So let me go over, close that here. So Angie Thomas is an author of the book, The Hate You Give. It's a young adult author. Has anyone read it or heard of it? Okay, nobody. All right. Okay, so Emma, you've heard of it. It was made into a movie, yes. So she's the author, and she was responding to the question, I don't know if you're all following this issue of banned books, that in many of the red states, southern states, they are drafting legislation and passing laws against things like teaching about Black history, or against books that have like gay characters, or swears. So that's often a reason, you know, or sexual acts or whatever. But swears are often the justification for wanting to ban books. So she was responding to this because her book has been banned now in some schools. So it's yet another reason why you should read it, actually. So I'm going to play this brief clip. So this is on Trevor Noah's show. He's interviewing her about that question.
There were some schools that didn't want to take your book, even though kids loved it, because they were like, this profanity that the kids are using in the book. We don't want our children reading this. How did you respond to that?
Well, my first thought was, you must not be listening to those kids in the hallways. But at first I was angry. I can't lie. I was so angry because I knew that was a cop-out.
Right.
Like, you can say that. And I will tell you this, there are exactly 89 instances of the F word and the hate you give. I counted on my Kindle. But last year alone, over 800 people lost their lives at the hands of police brutality. That number is far scarier. So when you're telling me it's the language, no, that's not what it is. You don't want to talk about the topic. And then when you're saying that, what you're telling these kids is that your stories don't matter. We don't want to hear your stories because they make us uncomfortable.
Right.
And my job as a writer is to write the stories that make adults uncomfortable, because that's what the kids need.
All right, so that was her brief take. And I see some of you doing the applause. The brief take on book bans: to write books that make adults uncomfortable. And I think that's a good message. And right, Aisha, people don't like to hear the truth. And so it's interesting to think, and we won't get into this discussion right now, maybe when I do the slideshow, or maybe in a couple of weeks, we'll talk about race and culture issues. Believe me, we'll get into all this stuff. But yeah, certainly it's like, which people are getting uncomfortable? I'm not uncomfortable by it. I'm perfectly fine. But, you know, which people are so uncomfortable that they feel the need to ban these books? And Melissa, you said, there are plenty of books read in schools that use derogatory language that is taught over generations. And then Tiffany said, yes, they don't. And it's a shame that these kids won't be able to learn about it when it's important to talk about. Yes, it's a shame that these schools are not allowing it. But at the same time, hopefully the students are savvy enough, let's say, to find these books on their own and say, oh, why are these adults trying to hide this truth from me? So that, you know, certainly we can get all this stuff on, you know, the internet these days. So I hope there's some curious kids out there. And I appreciate all your thoughts on that. But so this is connected to this idea of language, the power of language. As you saw in each of these different examples, there's the potential for language to be liberating, and then there's the potential for language to silence or to even obscure. So these are some of the issues that we'll talk about, and we'll also go over the supplemental essay, Language versus Lies, by Scott Russell Sanders. I'm not going to go through it paragraph by paragraph, but I should, because it's such a powerful essay. It's really important. But I think you all did a good job reading it and paraphrasing and responding to those questions. So I will go through it in the slideshow, and then I'll pause here and there to ask for your thoughts. And Marina, I see your comment. You agree? It's sad that they're banning topics, saying kids shouldn't read or learn about it. Yet many kids many kids lived many of it. Right. So this is people's experiences. And essentially, that's the whole idea of silencing. When you ban the books, you're saying, we don't want to hear about your story. We don't want to hear about your lives. So that's enough background for the moment. So now I'm going to go to my slideshow. So this is linked in Blackboard, but I'm just playing it from my computer right here. I'm going to try and do this in like 15 minutes. See what I can do. All right, so this means I'm going to move through it kind of quickly. So as I mentioned, language is powerful in a positive way, but also in a negative way. So euphemisms was one of the issues that was mentioned in the essay, but also we'll talk about doublespeak and propaganda. So this is a quote from the essay. The barrage. So he starts out with this story about advertising, and then he uses this quote: "The barrage of ads aims to stir in us a constant craving and to persuade us that we can satisfy our craving by spending money." And I can't remember who wrote this in the discussion board, this word frenzy, frenzied consumerism. Who said that? If you want to, can't remember. I wish somebody, anyway, frenzied consumerism. That's kind of what this is about. So he gives examples. There was joy. What did he say about joy? This was his mom, I think. Story of his mom. Why are you suddenly all quiet? Everybody, thank
So
you,
he
Aisha.
asked his mom why a dishwashing soap would be named Joy, and she said because it gets you to wanting to buy it.
Right, as if you're going to find joy in washing dishes, right? And again, I can't remember who said this about food advertising, but the colors red and yellow are used a lot, but it's interesting,
Yes.
yellow. Did
I
you?
did that,
You did,
yeah.
Aisha? Okay. Right. So I'm sorry. You said that yellow was like one of these colors that's supposed to be a happy color. So it's the same idea here. Like lemons, the scent of lemons is also something that makes you happy.
Yeah, I think it's yellow and blue are like really uplifting colors, so
Mhm.
yeah.
Interesting. So then we have Coca-Cola. What was the example that he gave about Coca-Cola? What was that slogan? Taste happiness, open happiness, right. And it's right there in this ad. That was an example of it. And sorry, I see Jeff, you had said, you posted the comment about the soap too. He asked his mom why the soap is called Joy, and she said to sell it. Exactly. So this is this idea of happiness, and what do you see? Like these images of, like, I don't know if they're necessarily Disney images, but you know, fun looking images. And who is this ad then appealing to or targeting? Kids, yes, Brie, exactly. So trying to get kids hooked on soda at an early age. And then we have love. So maybe not as nefarious, but we have the picture of the little baby. And why is it called Loves? This one's kind of obvious. Right. So if you love your child, you'll buy these diapers for them. Exactly. And then we have this one, I think he was talking about outdoor adventure. I can't move my chat box for some reason. So, oh, there we go. So outdoor adventure, this, you know, those rugged names of cars, like you wouldn't call it like the Ford Feather. It would be like the Ford Mustang or Bronco, which are like, you know, um, evoking wilderness and all that. Suburban, right, suburban people living out their rugged dreams. That's a really good word. I mean, good statement. So these are all the things they says in advertising, but getting to the more nefarious things and like how it can distort, there was advertising around clean coal. So in case you're not familiar, coal is one of the fossil fuels that's burned to produce energy. And there's no way that it can be burned without producing pollution. So, but because there's been more push to have, you know, alternative vehicles and alternative forms of energy, the coal industry is fearful. So they came out with this campaign to try to convince people that coal is cool. All right, so now we'll get to this idea of the power of language and its ability to kind of, again, in some negative ways, to shape our view of the world. So Sanders says it leads us to expect that all public uses of language will be dishonest and manipulative. So when we see all these ads and we become very cynical, this is also something to be cautious about, because we don't want to turn that cynicism into acceptance. And that's kind of what he's saying here. Made cynical by the lies of merchants, we are more likely to shrug at the lies of politicians, generals, pundits, televangelists, and propagandists and just be like, oh, that's what they all say. But he's saying there's a danger to this. Why is that dangerous? So I think this is kind of related to this idea of fear. And Bree said, the more we turn a blind eye, right? So that we just say, oh, what I don't see won't bother me, or, oh, they're all that way, there's nothing I can do about it. But then that can lead to accepting this as normal. And again, so that we don't question. So when we turn that blind eye, or if we're fearful and we just say, I don't want to know about this, then we're no longer being critical thinkers. And Jeff, you said it's dangerous because it means people will just believe anything, and if they don't investigate. Right. Excellent point there. So this is kind of what we're going to get into here. So I kind of talked about this a little bit, like our backgrounds, how we were raised, what our parents taught us, what we learned in school, what we learned if we go, if we have a religious affiliation, what we learned there. So all those things can kind of shape us. But more so, especially these days, we're inundated with media, different forms of media. So it could be TV, radio, internet, of course, social media. So there's so many forms of information that is bombarding us on a daily basis. And so I think of also Tyrek saying 24/7 with implicit bias, but it's kind of 24/7 with all this information as well coming at us. So this chart is really helpful for kind of understanding the perspective of the media that we watch or listen to. So I like to I should have actually, let me go back. Before I show that, I was going to ask the question, where do you get your news? So if you want to just type in the chat box, all of you, whoever's listening, where you get your news. And just go ahead and type. Keep posting. Okay, good. Now I'm seeing several of you. All right, so I'll read through these. So Twitter, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, Good Morning America, TikTok, CNN app, Google, Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, local and CNN, weather, News 8, CNN, Fox, CNN, YouTube, Facebook, CNN, CBS, online, Instagram, Apple News, and Instagram. So it's interesting, and this has happened. So every time I teach this, I ask the question. Melissa says NPR. Okay. Reddit, Twitter. So every time I teach, it seems like more and more recently, like the last 2 semesters, including now, there's more students accessing news through social media. And I do have, like, on my Twitter feed, a lot of the news sources, but then if you look through this list, they're, Twitter, Reddit, TikTok are not, and Facebook are not, and Instagram are not news sources, but they gather news. So it's still, where does that come from? So examples of news sources are more Good Morning America, CNN, Fox, CBS, NPR. All right. So now I show you this chart. And this is where you kind of look to see, well, where do those fall? So we have NPR over here, which is somewhat to the, so it says L. This means left or liberal. So we have NPR, CNN, I don't remember the other ones. I don't know what Good Morning America is, that ABC. But anyway, these would be in the center. So these are supposedly neutral. Oh, NPR News. Actually, oh, NPR Opinion is to the left. NPR News is center. So this is kind of saying if you want relatively unbiased, but again, everyone has biases, including the news, but relatively unbiased is in this center location. Aisha, you're saying for some reason you feel social apps like Twitter and TikTok show the truth more than what we see on the news. So so there might be people that are literally there experiencing it as it happens. And yes, you get information from that way. And that people often get banned, right, on TikTok in particular. And then Bree, you make an excellent point. This is about, how do you tell if something is credible? And you said on social media, it often goes unverified. So we'll kind of get into that. Reddit as well. Thank you all for that input. So then you can see over here on the right, the more conservative publications or TV shows. And then on the far, oh, this is like very far right to some extent. So now we've got euphemisms. This is what you wrote about in the discussion board, and his definition is covering up ugly realities with pretty words, which he says, started with the ancient Greeks with euphemismos, translated to English as euphemism, which means a word of good omen, a word that masks the stark truth. So I can't remember who said this, but sometimes that means in a positive way, sometimes in a negative way. So it might be, I think this is my example. So if somebody dies, often you say the euphemism, the old man passed away or he passed away. So that like takes something that's kind of difficult to handle and makes it not as harsh sounding. So that's one way euphemism can be used. But then he gives other examples in his essay, and I should have done this slide differently. But we have the peaceful atom. Had anyone ever heard that before? It's the first time I read this. Oh, you had, Bree. Interesting. The first time I read this, I did not know. Tyrek knew. All right, I'm just not aware of it. So this was used deceptively. Peaceful. Doesn't that sound nice? We'll get to that term a little later in a couple of minutes. So you'd think that's going to make it sound like something that's good. Interesting, Bree, you did a paper on it in middle school. Awesome. Do you want to share anything else about it? But essentially it's the atomic bombs that killed hundreds of thousands of people, innocent people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Right, Bree, the regret of the creator of the atomic bomb. I can't think of his name at the moment, it'll come to me. And then we have civilized savages, which was used to describe like the idea of, well, slavery, that's actually a good thing because we're civilizing savages. That's how it was pitched. And the same thing with indigenous people were called savages. So that term has been used. And then we have the term manifest destiny. Has anyone heard that before? Or used that term before? Oppenheimer, that was his name. Oppenheimer was the inventor of the atomic bomb. So Aisha and Tyrek, you've heard this manifest destiny, Ian. And so that's kind of a word that's been used since the founding of our country, that it was always this idea of going west, exploring so-called lands that were not occupied, and claiming lands. It was man's destiny to claim these lands as part of America. But essentially the reality is that there were indigenous people already living there for, does anyone know how long indigenous people were living here in this country? I always want to ask before I say it. Anyone want to guess how long indigenous people were here? So we've been in this country for about 500 years. I mean, settled as the, centuries. 2,000 years. So the conservative estimate is 10,000 years. Native people were living here for 10,000 years. And think about that, taking care of the land, not exploiting the land for 10,000 years. But some actually say 10 to 15,000 years have been living here in this land that we currently occupy as the United States. So there were people there, but they were uprooted, massacred, and relocated. Then, of course, we have separate but equal from the 1960s, 50s, 60s, segregation, Jim Crow. And we know that separate does not mean equal, even though at the time that was the law of the land. And then that term ethnic cleansing, again, sounds nice. Well, we like clean things, right? But it actually means genocide or the mass murder of thousands of innocent people. And that's happened in many countries. And I think he referred to it in Nazi Germany, but it's happened now still. And then he says, war, torture, and assassination have been sold to the American people with the same methods used in marketing any product. So think of joy. It's used in the same way as war, with little regard for the truth. So then one of the terms that he uses, a euphemism, collateral damage. Has anyone heard that before? And this is often used when there's war. So they might be like, oh, we were able to kill this Al-Qaeda leader, but the collateral damage was 1,000 people, civilians, people that were just going about their daily lives like you and me, were killed also at the same time. So that's what collateral damage is referring to. So this is what is referred to as doublespeak, language that deliberately obscures. So again, euphemisms hide difficult truths, but it's usually to make things sound better or to, make things easier to take. But the negative aspect of that is that it can also be used to deliberately hide the truth or to disguise and distort it. I keep trying to move my chat box. Okay, or reverse the meaning of words. So did anyone read the book 1984 by George Orwell? I reread it over the summer. And everything in there. So it was written, I think I talked about this before, but it was written in the 1940s, I think before or during World War II. And 1984 was into the future. So it was seeing this world in the future where propaganda essentially becomes the narrative and meanings of words are reversed. So their slogans were, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. So does any of this sound like what's happening in the world today? So this would be an example of when we refer to it as propaganda, which intentionally tries to distort the truth. You could also say it's lies, disinformation. And yes, some of you are aware of it too. And this is the quote from the essay from George Orwell. So we see this in political language, is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind. So it's kind of, again, saying that, reversing what the truth is. So this is, I can't remember who said it, maybe it was Melissa, who posted about the children at the border. So I added this to, yes, Melissa, good, okay, thank you. Glad I got that. So you reminded me of this, so I added this morning. So this actually started during the Obama administration, where people crossing the border into Mexico were separated from their families, children from their parents. But it got beyond out of control during the previous administration. Yet the current administration, the plan was supposed to be to correct these problems, where children would no longer be separated from their parents. And it's been like a few hundred that maybe were reunited, but there's still thousands of children living like this for years in these kinds of conditions. Does anyone know what the term was used for these detention facilities? So that's actually a euphemism too, but detention facility, but there's another euphemism that was used that's even more hiding the truth. All right, I get to reveal it. Have you heard that term? I usually said you home 3 siblings who just immigrated from Afghanistan. Same with them being separated from their mother. Well, that's nice that you did that, but that's sad too. So tender age shelters is the term that was used, the euphemism, deceptive euphemism for these. And then this is happening just a couple weeks ago. This term, legitimate political discourse. Has anyone heard that recently? So of course we know what happened a little over a year ago, January 6th, where let's say protesters broke into the Capitol and many people were injured and police officer killed. Rioters, thank you, Bree. Police officer killed and so much property damage. Hundreds of people, not all, have been arrested. And just recently, there were Republican members of the Republican Party who called it legitimate political discourse. And then if you Google that term, that would be another interesting one to Google and see what you find. But I found this this cartoon, which kind of sums it up. So this is being facetious. So the elephant is representing the Republican Party, in case you're wondering. And then most recently, so just yesterday, 2 days ago, today's already what? Today's the 24th. Peacekeepers. So Putin, the president of Russia, so this is from the Moscow Times, which is actually an independent news source, but still potentially there's propaganda there, said that he was sending peacekeepers to the border of Ukraine. Yes, peacekeepers or it was a peacekeeping mission. So think about that idea of doublespeak and shifting the meaning. The peacekeeping mission. And then we have on NPR, so remember, this is more center as far as a news source, and this is where they point out the other point of view. The UN leaders condemn Putin after he orders peacekeepers to Ukraine. So what does Scott Russell recommend for all of this? And I think some of you wrote it, and I'm going through it quickly because I'm realizing what time it is. He says we need to examine every slogan and label critically, challenge these euphemisms. So if something sounds too good to be true, or if it sounds like something's being hidden, like peacekeeping mission, you might want to find out the truth behind it. And that means doing research from some of those organizations that are credible. He also says to maintain that corporations should not be given the same rights as human beings. So this is, can't even get into that right now because there's not enough time. Defend what we love. I think Aisha had said this too. And make sure that we use language that's clear, accurate, and honest. And Marina said, defend the things we love and language itself. I'm glad you enjoyed that too. I liked that line. So this is like a step-by-step guide for how to recognize fake news, because again, we're going to be seeing questionable information probably over the next few days, and certainly it's horrifying. but we also need to figure out what's truth and what's not. So these are some things that you can check. And sorry, I'm just going to go through this quickly because I want to finish up. That's our last. So I hope you enjoyed that slideshow. I like kind of doing that when we deal with all these complex issues. I wanted to share a sample of a video, but maybe I'll wait till next week to show you the video that I created. But I wanted to go over your homework that's due next Thursday. First of all, you'll have 3 essays or 2 essays to read and then 1 poem to read. You'll need to respond to the discussion board post. The writing assignment is due next Thursday, but I just want to show you where it is. So if you, all my things out of the way, there we are. Go to the course content, to the week 5 folder. And then I think I put it at the end. Yeah, so at the end it says interview of family member. So if you click on that, this is not the actual assignment that you would submit, but these are the instructions. So the purpose is two things. One, to kind of use your investigative skills so you can gather background information from your subject, but then it's also to kind of think about your own history, your own heritage, and you'll be sharing your family member's story that way. So these are some questions. It's just a list that you can start with, but if it ends up being a conversation, that's fine too. So you'll have the option that says type it into a 1 to 2 page summary. You can either do that or you can do the slideshow or do a video. So on Tuesday, I'll share an example of what I did, and then I'll give you some more background with this about this assignment. I just want to let you know that it's there. If you have time over the weekend and want to get started on it, you can do it then. So now let me come back. Oh yay, I've got a minute left. So the other thing that I want to share is anyone looking for a job? I just found this out, and maybe you already got an email about this, but today at 3:30, there's a Zoom meeting with the Yale New Haven Hiring Initiative. They're looking to hire people to work at Yale. And let me say, Yale is a great school to work for because they have amazing benefits. If you don't yet own your own house, they have a program where I think they give you like $5,000 towards a down payment on a house if you want to buy a house in New Haven. The only thing is I think this is only available if you live, oh no, it is, okay, if you live in New Haven, or you can learn about the process of applying to Yale. Anyway, I thought that might be good if anyone's looking for a job, so I posted that link to, that's the Zoom link, 3:30 today, if you want to check that out. All right, yay. I managed to get through all of that within class time. Does, Melissa, do you have your hand up to ask a question? Or does anyone else have a question? Stopping the recording. Nope.